piece versus this little piece versus this little piece versus this color of green versus this blue over here, and how the red kind of breaks through that shape. That's all very thought out, constructed, elements that come into my work. This is another painting of my son. This is called Determined. When he was little, he used to have a little easel and paint beside me all the time. And I was always trying to get that look. He was determined, to paint the painting. And I recognized that it was the look that I got in my eyes when I was really determined to get things, just right. But I was having a hard time kind of painting him from the side. So then I kind of thought, well, what if I paint him the way the actual painting sees him? And so I gave him a piece of plexiglass and he scribbled all over it. And I did the painting of him like through the painting. So it's like you're looking at him through what he's creating. And so, yes, I did do the portrait first to completion. And then I took a deep breath and got up my guts and yes, slammed it right through his face and all over the painting. But of course, that was part of the design in the very, very beginning. So it was really fun and easy to do that. Even with simple portraits that I do, such as this, working with a model, again, commission piece, I think about how arcs and things run through the piece. So if you notice, there's this beautiful, curve shape that runs through the top of her head, in and around, it ends right in through here, and then connects again down through the shoulder. Same thing through the front of the head. It'll come down through into the shadow and off the shoulder, or down and through the neck. Sculptors are very aware of what are called arcs. And these are basically just overreaching the way one element can flow into another element. And the same thing happens in the two-dimensional surface. Her hair was a little bit longer, so I actually shortened it to make it kind of interconnect with this beautiful little shape that kind of runs through the portrait. This is a little older piece. I love doing vignetted pieces. And again, these ones are all pastel. To me, pastel is very flexible. I love the drawing element of it. And, I do them as a lot of commissions for people too. This was a commission actually I did for a family in Singapore. I painted all their children via video. So I taught them how to actually take videos of their children and get the lighting that I needed for them. And then did rather simple vignetted pieces of them through stop motion through the video. It was a really nice way to work. And I've been doing a lot more of that lately because the children can talk and move and I can really see the structure of their head. I'm not locked into any photos. And I really do like working with models or the actual person, but especially when you're working with toddlers, you don't get a chance to do that. So this is a recent commission I did of a little 4-year-old. It's called Arrested Momentum. And if you're around 3 or 4-year-olds at all, you can kind of realize that sometimes they're just a big whirlwind. And then when they do stop and stare and look at you, so I've emphasized the eye right here, and all of this motion and turbulence that goes around her plays into the thought that she's always in motion. And when she does stop and look at you, it's like a tornado stopping real fast. I do a lot of oil paintings as well recently. This is a little more formal piece. I'm starting to get to the point now where I'm letting a lot of elements go. Like what she's sitting on is not as important as like her foot or her hands or her face. Again, with beautiful arcs trying to run through the piece. This whole painting is actually based on the Fibonacci spiral. So if you imagine the nautilus shell turned upside down, you can see the spiral coming in, around, up and around, and into her eye and into her hand, and focus on the flowers where she's grabbing that. So I do a lot of commission work of families, big pieces. This is something that was like 54 inches high with a whole family on the front of their restored house. And it starts with a lot of photos, a lot of photo references. I meet with the family a lot, especially the young children. And again, I start thinking about what I call, after I figure out the design, after I figure out just where everything is going on the image, I start thinking about this next stage, which I call layer 2, or the what is the light doing stage, or my yellow stage. And this is what I'm going to show you guys today. So even when I'm doing something big and elaborate, this was just like a little 12-inch tall study. I start thinking about what the light is doing on the figures, how I'm going to piece all the elements together. And, so this is the actual painting here, where I start working on the background and part of the porch and everything. But you can see underneath how there's this yellow stage that runs underneath things, and then slams of color. So I can kind of think again in terms of it as puzzle pieces, putting puzzle pieces together. I don't think I've ever just painted a photo and copied it. I'm always putting, I call them my baker's dozen. I put at least a dozen different photos together, or I'll go and paint them from life. I always only work from my own photo references or from life, and just construct everything like puzzle pieces, like any good design. And working in pastel, things can start off pretty rough sometimes. So the one daughter, this is kind of how she was underneath of it all. and it's just kind of slammed in pastel, slammed in pigment, until I get to really refining things, you know, something like this, where it's a much more formal portrait. But even in this portrait, this is what's underneath of it. So there's a sense of figuring out hue and temperature and color and all these beautiful, I think of pastel, people think of pastel as like a very opaque medium, but I was a very watercolors for a lot of years, and watercolorists always think about almost treating the paint like stained glass, where we're glazing areas in. We're thinking about where can I kick greens and blues and purples and all these beautiful areas underneath. If not, I feel like an artist runs the danger of becoming, creating portraits that look like Barbie dolls, where they just have quote unquote flesh tone colors laid over top, and they miss all the subtle, beautiful nuance of things that can happen in a portrait. And so for me, I'm always thinking about how can I kick things underneath my final stages and get that to work for me in the best way possible. So for the next hour, what I was going to do, this is my photo reference of a model that I was working with a few years ago. His name is Victor. And so last night I just set up a quick little sketch of him over here. Did this in about 20 minutes or so from scratch. It's just easier for me to just sit down and just draw them. I don't use a grid system. I don't worry about it too much. I have a couple little things to help me trigger how to get a likeness kind of upfront and early on in a drawing. But what I thought I'd do today is, you know, since we don't have a whole lot of time, I thought I'd just start with kind of a simple drawing and take you through that yellow stage and why I do that. Because I often talk about that a good painting, especially trying to convey reality, is basically just a very well construction of lies. Because in the end, we're just working on a two-dimensional surface. I mean, this is just a flat two-dimensional surface. But if I know the right lies to tell, I can kind of create three-dimensionality, especially in something as sophisticated as the topography of the head. So this is kind of what we're going to wind up with at the end of the hour today. I'm going to take Victor's head and I'm going to set what I call the yellow stage or yellow pastel pen. I'm just literally working in pastel pencils on this gridded surface, which I can talk about in a second, and kind of build up what's happening on the topography of the head. That really kind of sounds kind of simple, but it's actually plays into a lot of not only the structure of the head, but what the light is doing on very sophisticated surfaces. Because the head has very nuanced planes that turn one way or another. Or even if you just think of your forehead, this area is a front plane, there's a 3/4 plane, and then a side plane when you talk, you know, think about your temples. So things kind of turn fast on the head. And the way we understand that is our brains are very wired to understand depth, even in something as shallow as, you know, our face. And so if in a painting, I don't give the sense of structure or dimension to my portraits, I wind up with what I call a dinner plate portrait. So I see this all the time, and you may have seen these kind of portraits all the time, where everyone kind of serves up on a flesh tone colored round head features. So they're very worried about the features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And so we serve up these features on this flesh tone colored face or head, and it becomes this dinner plate portrait where we're serving up, you know, here's my portrait, here's little Johnny, and we're missing the structure, the how our eyes and our brains are wired to really see depth in the head, how far back our ears are from the front tip of our nose. And over the years, this has become really important to me to understand light, how light acts, and the structures of the head. And so how I really do that, a lot of other artists kind of figure all that out later on in the stages of the painting when they're dealing with color and such. For me, especially coming from an illustrator and a graphic design background, it just was easier for me to figure out what is lit and what is not lit, and how to channel that into a very concise image without worrying about color or even worrying about a likeness at this early stage. I just kind of figure out a basic drawing, and then I'm going to set almost my three-dimensionality and create my lies over top of this. So like I said, I'm working in pastel pencil. Typically when I get into this stage, I say this is my fistful of yellow. So these are all just yellow pastel pencils, and they're any brand. If you're familiar with pastels at all, there are, you know, sticks, and some are, they call them soft and hard. I typically don't think of them like that. But pastels are kind of like, a lot of people think of them like colored pencils, but they're actually, again, two different mediums. Colored pencils have wax in them, and they act very differently than pastel pencils. So there are binders in pastel pencils. There's clay and different things that manufacturers add to them so that we're able to sharpen them. But yeah, they're just pastel pencils, nothing elaborate at all. And I just really love the drawing element of pastel so much. So I will actually work with pastels a lot, even on large pieces, until I get maybe about halfway through the image, and then I'll start adding the softer, more dense, more pigmented sticks to it. Again, it's kind of like if you think in terms of watercolor paint, you know, if you pour a red, get a red tube of paint and pour it out on your palette, it's bright red. If you add water to it, it's still pretty red, but it's watered down. So basically pastel pencils are just watered down pigment. And so I can, you know, scribble over top of them, add a lot of crazy colors, kind of feel very flexible. And even pushing something as bright canary yellow is what I'm going to do to his head, just kind of sets up my image as a footprint or a foundation to all the colors and all the other things that it will eventually lay over top. So if you're wondering what surface I'm working on, this is called Sennelier Le Carte paper. If you're not familiar with pastel at all, a lot of pastels really like to work on what's called a gridded surface. Kind of feels a little bit like a really soft sandpaper, but it's archival. It's sprayed on in a certain way, so it has a really nice uniform texture. And what the gridded surface does is it allows the pastel to kind of channel itself into these grooves and valleys of the actual paper and help the pastel stick to it. So some people like a really heavy gridded surface, some don't like a gridded surface at all, and they'll just work on paper. It's just personal preference on how a lot of artists like to work. For me, I like a gridded surface because I like the ability to layer a lot, change things. It gives me a lot more flexibility than just a regular pastel paper. If you were to feel this, you would feel it's almost like kind of like a really soft suede. I also like working on what's called a tone surface. So this is kind of a mid-tone. In other words, it's not too dark and it's not too light. It kind of falls right in the middle. And it's just a nice way to kind of, you know, build up my lights and then push down my darks from a mid value. So this nice brown mid-tone. I like to work on greens as well. Some of bluish gray tone sometimes. Again, it's personal preference. This just happens to be one of my favorite surfaces. I talked about the pencils too. If you'll notice, and I can hold one of these up real quick, I don't believe in sharpening my pencils. A lot of people are like, oh, you have to sharpen the pencils. I really don't care. I don't have time for that. I say I have 3 children and they took all my brain cells. So I don't have, so anything that I can throw out that I don't need to do, I don't do. So literally when I go to sharpen these, I just use a X-Acto blade and I just block point them. So in other words, I just kind of shave them down on the sides. You can see where I kind of expose the yellow as much as possible. I can put this in front of my shirt here. And I don't care if there's a tip on it or not. If you can see, it's almost kind of squared off. And it gives me a beautiful thin line. I don't see any need to get a line any thinner than that. If I'm obsessed with working so small that I need a tiny little tip, like as if I was working with a ballpoint pen, then I know I'm working too small, too detailed, and I need to back away and get to probably a broader line to make things more painterly anyway. So, so I have like 5 or 6 of these kind of just laying around right now. I have them all, you know, block sharpened. And when I burn up one, I just throw it to the side and grab another one. So when I do demonstrations, I just normally have a big fistful of yellow and I just burn them up as I go along. So if there's any questions, again, please put a question down into the chat. Melissa is going to be able to read those out to me. So it's kind of hard for me. She's helping me out because it's hard for me to kind of look over here and see the questions while I'm over here on this camera painting on the drafting table. But feel free to interrupt me, truly, if you have a question about anything I'm doing.
So
or
Christine,
yeah.
Christine, someone has a question about what type of fixative do you use, if any?
Yeah, so typically I try not to use a fixative as much as possible. If you're not familiar, a fixative is almost, if you almost think of like the old-fashioned hairsprays. A lot of pastelists like to work on a painting and then spray it, or what's called fixing it. And so that helps the pastel to kind of adhere to the surface and you don't get this what's called dust transfer, where dust will come off the surface. If I'm doing something elaborate, like I've done a couple situations where I've done little kids in front of like big black pianos or something like that, something formal, I will actually create the entire piano first, spray that off, make sure it's as sealed as possible, and then create the child in front of that. That way, all that black dust is not at risk of transferring into the really clean, clearer colors that I would want on the child, something like that. But if I'm just doing a basic kind of headshot like this, pastel is always framed under glass, unlike oils or acrylics. It leads to the impression that pastels are actually fragile. It's actually not quite true. Fragile in the sense that if you don't put it under a piece of glass or frame it, you could take your hand right over top of it and blur it out. So you do want to protect the surface. But pastels are actually very archival. There's paintings that have been done 600-700 years ago that look just as fresh and beautiful today as they did back then. And the reason why is there's no oil added into it. So unlike oil paints, they will not crack or yellow over the years. So they're actually, as long as you kind of take care of them and put them under glass, they're actually pretty hardy. But again, even when I'm doing a portrait, kind of something simple like this, I just know I'm going to get it under glass as fast as possible, and I'm not going to worry too much about fixing it. Okay. So what I was going to do next, again, feel free to throw in questions as we go along. I love that. I'm going to flip over to this camera over here. Yeah.
There's another question that just came in, and sure. They're curious as to what are some occasions that people will commission portraits for.
Sure. So forgive me, I just went ahead and pushed over to this demo camera over here. I want to make sure everybody sure is on the same page with me over here. So I've done just about anything over the years. I've done formal corporate portraits for different clients. I've done complete families. I've done things in memoriam for people when someone has passed away and they want to honor them in a company or corporate. I've done some for some hospitals. I've done them for, some nursing care homes to honor some founders that have happened with the organization. Most of the time, my most bread and butter is little children. I paint an awful lot of little Johnnies, 5, 6, 7 years old. Typically, there's a break there where about 6, 7, 8, where they start losing their teeth, where they get a little wonky. So I typically try and get them right before that or right after that. I've also done a lot of teenagers. So instead of like a formal photograph or photography shoot or formal photos for someone when they're graduating from high school or college, the family hires me to do a formal painting of them. So I've done a lot of that. Okay, so hopefully everybody's over here on this image right here with the camera. And like you can see, the nice thing again about this surface is it's just kind of a nice warm surface. My hand is obviously a lot lighter than this, but it almost like if I got a shadow going, can you see like if I had like a shadowed area on the dark side of my hand right here, it kind of matches up with this paper a little bit. So it's kind of nice to know that as the head would rotate into the shadow, I'm kind of going back into almost this paper color. So I'm just going to kind of take these bright canary yellow, you can see them, they're just bright, kind of really acidic, think of Crayola yellow, right to his head. And over here on this side, I have an iPad. It's kind of set up so that I can look at it straight on. To your camera or to your view, it's going to look at a little weird angle. I have it kicked to me so I can look straight onto his head, so I'm not distorted with the head the way I'm looking at it at all. And then I'm trying to look straight down on this drawing as much as possible, very straight on too. I've had it where in the past I've done demonstrations with big mirrors overhead or different things, and if I'm not looking straight down at the drawing, the heads will get a little cocked, they'll get a long, they'll be like long and skinny and narrow because I'm looking down at them at an angle. So I want to make sure that I have the camera down on it as much as possible. My face is kind of right beside the camera angle that you guys are looking at, and I'm drawing just straight into it like that. But I'm looking over here at the iPad that I have over to the side. And so once I have a drawing where I'm feeling pretty good about where everything is on the image, and the first layer really is all about composition and just where is everything. I'm always asking myself, where is everything? And that includes more than just where are his features. That's where does he sit on the page? What's happening in the background? What are the relationships between, what's important in the painting and what's not important? So there's a lot of decisions that artists make along the way. I just say artists are just decision makers, and a painting is just a construction or a buildup of many, many decisions that an artist has made. And so when I get into this second layer where I'm asking myself, what is the light doing on this topography of his head? The yellow just really helps me to go in and understand how that light is falling. And so when I work with models or even with little children, I'm always trying to have one light source, because one light source will tell me what those light beams are doing across this very complex topography. And if I can kind of understand how the light is falling and turning, I shouldn't say turning because it's the face that's turning, the light's not turning. If I can understand that, then anyone that looks at the painting, or I will look at the painting, I will get a sense of three-dimensionality to it. And again, this is really just breaking the picture plane. This whole entire construction is basically building up lie, saying that he is three-dimensional on this very flat surface. So I want to give myself every opportunity to be able to do that, and understanding how the light is falling on him is one way that I do it. So I just start with yellow, and I'm just going to start kind of at the back of his head. And basically, all I'm saying to myself is, how is the light on all of these surfaces? And if I was doing a very elaborate portrait with 5 or 6 people or a dog in the background or, whatever, constantly I'm asking myself, what is the light doing? And no matter what happens in the painting, if it's a chair, a dog, background, his shirt, whatever, I'm going to study what the light is doing on everything. So everything gets what I call the yellow treatment. And so right here, I'm kind of just following the form of his head a little bit. But when I get down in here where it's a little more sophisticated, I'll be doing little circles. I'll be doing, pushing down on the pencil a little bit more, because if I come down in here where there's a little more on the brow ridge, there's this big ridge that happens right in here above the eyes, and it'll catch the light much stronger. So just by taking the pencil and pushing down on it a little bit more, can you see how I can kind of very, very quickly understand what the light is doing here versus now here? And so it's just, again, this kind of simple way for me to just understand the topography and just very quickly kind of establish what the forms are doing. Again, always trying to find the form a little bit, but mostly understand what the structure is doing. Eyes, nose, and mouth, and just the, his head is less important to me than all of this beautiful stuff. I'm going to zoom the camera in on here for you real quick. Give me 1 second. There, hopefully you can see that a little bit better. And so again, photos, I always say photos tell us a ton of lies about what's actually happening with someone's head. It's very difficult to just paint from a photograph. Sometimes, like I said, when you're working with little kids, and I work with a lot of little kids, you kind of have to figure out what's happening with the structures of their head. You have to take many, many photos so you can really understand, because I might get one photo. If you've seen, like, sometimes you'll get one picture of someone and it kind of looks like them, but not really. But then in another one, you're like, oh man, that's really them. So I have to kind of work with the client sometimes to not only just see what I want to see about their children or their family portrait or whatever it is they want done, but that when they look at the painting, they're like, oh yes, that's little Johnny. That's his quirky little look. That's his fat little cheeks. And sometimes if I take just a random photo of someone, maybe their cheeks are really, really fat and really pudgy. And in the photo that I'm trying to build a painting from, I'm not getting that. So I have to take multiple photos from multiple different angles and really kind of understand the person that I'm painting. Again, if I go right down through this nose and now I go back through and I kind of just put in this harsher, push down on it a little bit harder, I can see now where there's more of this highlight right on the end of the nose. And yet this whole area right here is also lit around the nose. And so this whole layer to me is really about relativity. It's really about, how lit is this area right here underneath his eye, which is very, very softly done. So I want my pencil to kind of tell me that, versus as it kind of starts coming out into the cheek area and right in through here, it's getting the full brunt of those light beams again before it starts to fall off. So it's really kind of a lesson in not only the structure of the head, but how light acts, how it comes in and hits this plane more at a perpendicular angle. And then this area here is still lit, but not as lit. And so this whole thing is just really a study in relativity. And once I understand again what's happening with his head, then I can start thinking of more sophisticated things like color and a likeness and what is it I want to say about this person. It becomes this whole entire dance. I think that's why I love commission painting so much. It's because they're all different. And, I've painted children when they were 8, 9, 10 years old, and then painted them again when they're teenagers. And it's just really amazing to see how transformative people are as they grow older, but there's still that little kid in there. There's still the same structure of the head in a lot of ways. And I've gotten, Christmas cards from clients and things for over many years, seeing the kids grow up. And it's for me, I just could never do sitting at a desk and do the same kind of thing over and over again. I really need the variety of working with different families, having different priorities. Some families are very contemporary and they want something very sleek and, they have a purpose to what they want painted, versus other people want something a lot more traditional. And so I just love being able to work with people. Again, he's got this full mustache and beard that's happening in through here, just with the yellow, and in very quick fashion, I can kind of just change kind of the strokes that I'm using for the pencil. And right away, you can kind of get this feeling of this lovely full beard and the light kind of hitting it right here near the corner of the mouth. And as it comes away and goes into the dark, or in what's called the break. There's literally what happens is the light beams are traveling in a very linear fashion. And as the form turns, like right in through all of here, none of this is lit directly by light. And so there's what's called the break in here. And typically it's very sophisticated. There's a very soft way that those light beams are dragging themselves across the surface before they just totally disappear. And then none of this is lit anymore. So when I teach, I really teach a lot about light and how light acts. And I'm always telling people to really understand what is lit and what is not lit, and what is the relativity and what is the relationships of the lit area to each other. All these different passages have to be, you know, relative to each other. So like right in here is a lot stronger yellow. So I'm going to just push down on the pencil just a little bit more, just to kind of get that feel of that strength of light hitting on the front of him, and then how it's turning. And you can see, like, I've been working on this for now, what, 5-10 minutes? It's starting to already kind of give me this molding of this two-dimensional surface. I'm kind of understanding what's happening with him. And I'll go back through it many times where I know the front of his head is much more lit than the back of his head. And if it's, you know, if they start, you know, being too similar, like for example, if I start doing this in the back of his head, let me just do that wrong for 1 minute. You can see that now I've got a problem with the form. So now the light is telling me, well, this is getting hit as evenly here as it is here. And it just feels a little off, because that's not what's happening when you have a very circular object like someone's head. So this all has to just, again, playing with relativity, this has to all be knocked back, because this light is just not as lit as the front of the head, if that makes sense. And so I literally have to do this. I have to understand this before I can understand, well, what color is this versus what color is this versus what color is this, because that's a very sophisticated travel. And so there's different values that are happening here. There's different hues that would be happening in through here, as well as different temperatures or textures that would be happening in here as well. And so I want to make sure that I set it up so that I really understand what the structure of the head is doing first before I attempt to even think about something like color. So again, I'm just kind of loosely putting in this mustache area, something like that is happening. If you notice, the photograph is not a very great photograph. I actually like working from photographs that are actually not great because then it allows me to kind of interpret what I'm seeing a little bit more. If I get too married to the photo, I know that I'm going to get too stiff. I'm going to get too caught up into details. As long as I have the structure of what the light is happening on the head, I can make up colors. Like I could literally paint him all in violets and blues and it would still work, as long as the structure here and me understanding the light is dead on. So this is why I do this stage and why it's so very important. And so when I teach workshops, you literally will have a whole entire classroom full of people creating yellow people for a while. And it's actually kind of fun. And it opens up a lot of artists' eyes too, to the structure of things that maybe they weren't thinking about before. They're so busy thinking about eyes, nose, and mouth. They're so always thinking about color, which kind of can dominate a painting really quickly. But instead, I want them to think about, you know, so this ear is kind of kicked off, like if you think of it like an elephant, like the ear is kicked off from the side of the head. And so it's just getting some of this light over here. And so again, if I just kind of go over and just study what the light is doing in this photo, I can very quickly tell you what the sophisticated topography is doing with the ear. If you ever want to know if someone's a very good artist, have them look at how they paint ears, because ears are very sophisticated. They're very individualized to each person. And so if an artist, you know, is doing a wonderful job on the features and they've kind of buffled through the ears, you know, they're not looking as slowly and as softly as they could to understand what all that topography is doing. And so I often, you know, look at how people paint ears, and then I know if they're very cautious in their paintings or not. Again, there's this beautiful little break that's happening right here in the front of the ear. This stage also helps me to set up my edges. Edges are something that artists talk about a lot. In other words, like the edge, there's a light happening right here that's very sharp right on the front of this little earlobe. And so I want to convey that, and then it falls away. And so my strokes need to do that. But right up in here, it's very sharp right in here. So there's a sharp edge. And then as it goes and attaches to the side of the head, it basically disappears. So the edge of here on this right here is very soft and it disappears into the side of the head. Very important to understanding what the light is telling me about the structure of the head versus where the ear is coming off the head and it's coming in front of the rest of the head and has this very sharp edge. So as artists paint things like this, we're always very aware of how the edges are, how things meld into one another, you know, how the structure is happening. I just get to do it now in this beautiful yellow stage without worrying about the complexity of color, because there'll probably be, you know, 5, 10, you could have 20 different variations of color in this ear. But for me, I need this first. So I need to understand this first. And so right in through here, you know, I'm not going to play with the collar too much, but you can kind of see how, again, I can kind of just really understand what's happening just with this sharp little edge of his collar and how lit this little front edge of it is. And I can push down on my pencil again, just subtly, and then how it breaks, how it falls away, tells me how that collar is in light. And again, so it's softer here. There's kind of this big shadow shape that's happening right in through here with the collar. And I have to ask myself, as a decision maker, do I care if there's a big wrinkle here in his collar? Do I want to let it go? Do I just want to emphasize this front lip part? It's really kind of this weird game that artists play of what's important, what to bring forward. And I talk to artists that I teach all the time about their intentions for a piece, because I could have 15 artists in a room and we could all have 15 different intentions to what we want to say about this man and how we put in our strokes, what we emphasize. Someone might decide that, oh, this shirt, you know, and the way the collar is around his neck constricting him is what the painting is about, that he's choked by what he has to wear every day. Maybe he's in a profession that he doesn't like. So we can bring a lot of these narratives and a lot of these kind of unspoken things into a painting just by the way we handle the image, just by the way we render things. And it's just this beautiful, wonderful thing. I've run into engineers and things over the years that have said to me, it's just really amazing how artists can kind of just share things with each other. Like, it's almost like you're giving away trade secrets, you know, like you're showing people that you work in this yellow beforehand or what colors you mix. And it kind of boggles their brain because they're more in a profession where everything is held more secret. And, you know, you don't want anybody else to know what you were doing. And the beauty of being an artist is that everyone else could probably copy exactly what I'm doing here. And I've had it where I've had 20 people in a class and we were all doing the exact same thing, maybe all the same person and basically the same view, and none of them feel the same. It's this beautiful phenomenon that happens in nature where, you know, we all kind of bring ourselves into it. We bring our experiences into it. And so it's this beautiful thing where it's just like our handwriting, you know, it's like everybody's handwriting is different from each other. And it's because of our personalities and what we bring to it. And then if we start setting certain intentions in a piece, that will affect the piece as well. And so it's just this really wonderful, fun thing. So I say to my engineer friends, well, it doesn't matter because I can show you everything that I can do. I can show exactly how I work, but no one else can work like me. And it's this beautiful thing. It's just like my handwriting. So my paintings have my distinctive handwriting or footprint on my painting, and no one else can exactly copy it, which is really a beautiful and wonderful thing. Again, there's some darkness where the light kind of disappears and doesn't really hit the collar too much here, and then it picks up again on the shoulder. So if I was doing this, you know, very elaborately or as a sophisticated piece, I would make sure that I understood exactly what's happening all with the shoulder and that kind of thing. Again, artists can get themselves in trouble where they see like bright shirts. And so say maybe I would do something like that. What's happening, this is what's called breaking the law of light, because as light hits the surface and then as it drags and goes away, it diminishes in power away from the light source. And so nothing over here can be as lit as something over here that's much closer to the light source. So my highest highlights and things like that will be over here on this side of the face where it's closer to the direct light source. Again, I'm doing little circles. I'm kind of trying to understand what's happening on this brow ridge. So I would never get something as lit over here as down here. There has to be, again, this hierarchy happening, this relativity happening. And again, that all comes down to understanding light. So for the last 6 months, I've actually been doing a lot of Zoom classes online with different organizations and just teaching the law of light. So I get artists to kind of think about what's happening with this complex topography of the head like this before they even think about actually quote unquote painting something, because this will set the foundation for reality, if that's the goal. You know, a lot of artists, reality maybe is not the goal, but if you're, you know, in the line of wanting to do something very realistic or to do commission work and you want something very realistic, you have to understand the relationships of this that light is showing us across anything. And so I've been actually teaching a lot of workshops like that over the last 7 months, which has really saved me because of COVID. You know, it's been kind of crazy, as you can imagine. I've had to really adjust. I've had a lot of clients obviously cancel out on me in the last year because, you know, they don't want their families exposed to someone coming into the house, or, you know, in the beginning, everybody was panicking over, you know, what was happening next. And so the last thing they were thinking about was art for their home or their businesses. And so I started teaching with CMU on how to learn how to do Zoom classes with Carnegie Mellon. And then that kind of led into doing these full scale Zoom classes where I was teaching about light actually, and doing portrait, you know, teaching about portraits and things like that, which is always really fun. I mean, I love doing it in person, but the Zoom has actually been working out really, really well. And it's letting me survive financially, which is always a good thing. So yeah, I've had people, the first workshop I ran in November, I had it filled up within about 4 days. And I had people from all over the world, which is the beauty of Zoom. As you can probably realize, I had people from Australia and South Africa and the Netherlands and Canada, and we were all being able to be brought together and paint all day long like this, kind of as a guided painting with people all over the world. So I've actually really been enjoying that, and it's really been a lot of fun. And then there's a bunch of different organizations here in the United States that have asked me to do all-day workshops or demonstrations like this. So I've been very busy, which has been really, really nice, and enjoying that a lot. Does anyone have any questions on this at all? Normally about this time is when people are kind of like, it's kind of amazing that you can get this kind of three-dimensionality feel with just one yellow pencil. And it really is kind of a fun thing. It really, you know, is just this beautiful way to kind of just understand something that's extremely complex without worrying about, you know, color, hue, and temperature. And at this stage, I'm still not even worried if it looks like him or not. I'm really not worried about, you know, if this exactly looks like the person. I'm only going after what is the light telling me? And as I put in the light, or I understand, you know, the shape of this beard and how the light is happening, or this little beautiful lit area underneath the nose here, this will knock my drawing into shape. So my drawing will actually become stronger underneath of it, because I can catch the errors that were perhaps in the initial drawing, like right in through here, there's this roundness to his nose. So that if I put in the highlight and actually paint the lit part of his nose, I'm actually going to get the feel more accurately of his nose than me just sitting here and putting in a line of it. So
hey Christine, there's one question. What was your initial sketch done with?
Just pastel pencils. So again, I have just darker brown, black, and like a little bit of a lighter brown. So I just sat here last night in about 20 minutes and just did the underlying drawing. And then like near his eyes and the corners of his mouth, literally I'll start with something that's kind of like light brown. And then I just keep getting darker and darker and creep up toward more black. I just went ahead and kind of made the eye a little black because we don't have time today for me to really, you know, paint those or render them, and just kind of set the edges of things. So I can pick up the black again right in here. So say like, pretend that I just kind of was losing his eyes. I can go back in and reset it and darken it back up again and get the drawing back in there again. Or maybe I've lost the bridge of the nose. So I can go back and reestablish, you know, this particular shape of his nose. Maybe the nostrils are lost, or, you know, like maybe this needs to be a little higher, which I do think it does need to be. And so I can go back in and just kind of reset those areas. So I do that a lot. You know, once I hit the yellow stage and I'm feeling pretty good about it, sometimes what I do is I'll go back a stage and refine my drawing, and then I'll go back forward into the yellow stage. There's 3 stages after this, how I build all of my paintings, you know, how I treat color and everything. And if I get into trouble at any one of those stages, the beauty of this kind of paper where you're working on something very gridded, and the beauty of working only in pastel pencils, is that I can go back a stage. So say I'm starting to throw color in here and I feel like his nose has gotten wonky or it doesn't look like him anymore. I just stop, I breathe, I forgive myself. I say it's okay, because this is a you know, a process, and artists need to forgive themselves. So if something is a little wonky or a little off, I stop and I breathe and I go back and I grab my yellow pencil and I find the forms again, or I find the light again. And if that doesn't work, I go all the way back and reset some of the drawing and say, okay, you know, his eyebrows are a little more deeper here, a little more thicker set. Maybe I've kind of lost some of that. And I go back in and I just refine all that again. And then I'll bounce back up into the more colorful stages. And so again, I need to find a way. Like I said, I have 3 children, and over the years, I feel like I've just lost all my brain cells. And so I need to find ways to easily build a likeness with something that's, you know, so sophisticated. I often have artists come into my workshops and they're always very disappointed very quickly with, what they're painting, because they've never done a portrait before. And I often say, well, it's this curse that we artists have, that we feel like we should be able to sit down and pick up paints and just create something amazing, because nobody would expect to, pick up a violin and say, oh, well, I've been painting for 6 months now, I'm going to play with the Pittsburgh Symphony. And yet, if you're painting children, especially young little children from photographs, I mean, you're diving into the deep end of the pool. I mean, this is going to the Olympics. It's very difficult stuff. It's very mental stuff. And so, there's a lot of decisions to be made along the way and a lot of learning to be done along the way. I was actually in a workshop one time. I was teaching up in Cranberry at the business center that was up there. And I had 3 or 4 models and a bunch of artists, and we were all painting. And I welcomed other people from the other business seminars that were, in the building to come over and take a look and see what we were doing. And I remember I had a woman come into the class, and she was looking around at what we were doing. And she's like, oh, it must be so nice to just sit around and just draw and just play all day. And obviously you can imagine a lot of artists became very offended at that, because this stuff is actually pretty hard. I mean, I get it that painting maybe seem like something that's just fun or that's not a serious profession, but for a lot of us, it's very serious. And, the decisions that we make on these picture planes, the decisions that we bring into our paintings is work, and it's brain power. And by the end of the day, if you've ever taken a painting class, your brain will literally hurt if you don't, if you're not used to thinking like this. So you can see right here, I've kind of got a pencil that's just a little bit darker than the paper color back here. If you can see it, it's like, I can push on a little harder. It's just kind of a little bit darker than the paper color. And it just kind of almost acts like my eraser. Like I can go back through and just add little things or shorten up the ear. Maybe, maybe it's too yellow down here in the beard here. And I can just kind of knock it back a little bit. So it's, again, a way to kind of like structurally find things in the painting very easily, very quickly. And people have asked me, when I switch to oil painting, do I treat the painting the exact same way? And I actually do. So I've actually been doing oil paintings by putting this yellow stage in first and then building over top of that. So for me, again, it's very important to understand this structure first before doing anything else.
Christine, we have a couple more questions for you. What type of pastels do you use?
Yeah. Okay, so typically with most pastelists, we tend to collect like everything under the sun. It's just kind of a curse of being a pastel painter. There's a lot of different brands out there, and they do a lot of different things. So I guess my answer to that is I have a smattering kind of everything. And for one reason or another, I like certain brands for one reason or another. So for example, there are some pastels that are very good at building a lot of layers in the head. There are some pastels that are, really packed with punch, so that when you add them to a painting, they will really glow. However, if you use those in an area that you don't want to glow, then they're going to unstroke your painting. So again, there's this hierarchy that happens in a portrait, and there's intention that an artist hopefully has set up that they want in a portrait. And so you want to make sure your materials, support that. So there's a bunch of different brands that I use. And if you're not into pastel, I know we have a lot of people here that are not artists, so I won't get into all of that, but they're, it's a sophisticated thing once you start really playing with any medium, really, what brand you prefer, what brushes do you like, that kind of thing. So a lot of it does come down to personal preference. So it just depends on what an artist likes. So yeah, so I use a little bit of everything, I guess, is my simple answer. Kind of trying to get a little bit more of this little darker color back in here on the side of his head. So again, I'm kind of feeling like how this head would turn off into space. Lines are wonderful. And when we do drawings like this, it's a beautiful thing, but really in reality, there are no lines around anything in real life. It's only one plane meeting up to another plane. Did that go out of focus? Bring it back. There it goes. And so, it's nice to be able to say, well, this is the end of his head and I was using lines to get it. But in reality, it's really just where his head stops and the background begins. So that's when I really start thinking about form and color and kind of start eliminating some of these lines. And sometimes I'll keep them in if I have, pretty lines on something. There's a beauty and a grace to a really simply well put in, well designed line. And so it's just one element of painting. But typically when you start finding areas like this that maybe is not as important as something like maybe in his eyes, I'll start losing the line and having things kind of disappear into the background. So again, this becomes not as important as what's happening over here. So again, now I was talking before about relativity of light and how light acts on the surface. Now I'm thinking about relativity of the paper or the painting overall, what's important, what's not important, and how to set up hierarchies like that through the piece. This is a typical stick right here of pastel. Again, this is like, you know, heavier pigment than the pastel pencils that I was just using. And so once I start getting the yellow stage kind of pretty well established, I'll go through with something even brighter that's like this. So basically what happens is, like, if I put this on the end of his nose, you're going to see that it's going to be much more yellow and jump a lot more than anything else on the painting, hopefully. And so down the bridge of the nose too, and I don't even have to push hard with this. This is now really laying down stronger color. And I can tickle a little bit up here on the highlights on the, you know, on the forehead. And that again will just help set the believability of the three-dimensionality of the piece. There's this beautiful little highlight that's happening right in through here on his cheek. So I'm going to play that up even more. And another nice thing about this yellow stage is that it plays into the upper layers of color. So, you know, once I do start painting, you know, quote unquote, the beard color or the face color or something like that, what happens is this beautiful yellow glow will help give me the impression that this area of his skin is lit, or of his beard is lit, because it has this little tiny glaze really of yellow that will be underneath of it. And so, so the yellow again serves a lot of different purposes. It tells me about the edges of things. It tells me what the light is doing on this complex topography. And then it will also give me this kick to whatever color will be over top of it. So even if, you know, say his shirt was, it's kind of blue-green in the photo that I have here, but say it was really, really a cool color, like a cobalt blue or something like that, I would still treat it with yellow underneath, and anything I set over top will feel warmed up or lit because of having put this yellow underneath. And so it's just, again, this beautiful, graceful way to have nuance in color and have something more sophisticated than quote unquote flesh tone colors in the head. And yeah, it's just kind of a nice way to kind of play like that. I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock, and I know some people probably have to, you know, only make this 1 hour. So if there's any other questions, let me know. I wasn't going to take this too much further along than this. Just basically wanted to kind of show, you know, my process here. I can zoom in on this a little bit more so you can kind of see, if you're looking at the drawing itself, that it's still pretty broken. It's kind of loose. I'm not quote unquote rendering it. I'm not blending things. A lot of people think of pastels as that you have to take areas and smudge it or blend it. Typically what happens when you, and this is a kind of a dangerous thing with pastels, we like to stick our fingers in it, you know, get it all over us, and we'll start smudging things out. The problem with doing that is that pastel is little tiny crystals of color, like they're little tiny crystals. And when you go in and you start smudging all these different colors around, what happens is you kind of like just kill them all. So if you remember in the beginning, I was talking how like pastel can be like stained glass, where we're just glazing areas together. If I go in with my fingers and kind of smudge all that around, all of a sudden I've killed that stained glass feel. So those little tiny crystals that are throwing off different colors now become this just muddy mess. So I try not to stick I always tell people, or my artists in my classes, don't give your painting the finger. It's disrespectful. It's not very nice. So don't do that. So instead I like to build things up, you know, with different colors and different layers. And so this is like something that's kind of like a dark red color. And so I could just even real quickly, like I could just start, just even if I did this right on the turn of the break where it starts going into the cheek, you can start seeing how I can start just warming up this area a little bit. And it's just, again, a nice way to kind of glaze in some warmth on areas. And so basically my paintings are built up like this, where I'm just glazing and glazing and glazing. And I'm just looking for subtle nuances of things and hopefully trying to find a likeness somewhere along the way. And, you know, as long as I pay attention to the light and I'm very careful at what I'm looking at and look at the relativity of everything, slowly I'll start building up the quote unquote color, and then hopefully get the likeness in there too. So you can see, like, even just by doing that just a little bit, I've kind of almost given the illusion that there's color to his head a little bit. This is really kind of getting blown out orange. I don't know why this looks so orange at the moment, but and I'll pick all kind of weird colors. So this is like a lavender color, if you can see that. And, you know, I can just start playing around with where I see it, like right in through here. I feel like there's a lot of cool areas on his temple. And again, I'm just kind of scribbling. I'm doing yellow, circles. I'm doing a little bit of everything. Right in through here, you know, it's cooler where the light kind of leaves and goes into more of the shadowed side underneath the lobe of the head. So I would just kind of just play with some of these colors like this. And so this leads into the third stage, which would be what I call my rainbow colored stage or my crazy color stage. And it's really where I'm looking all over the head and I'm trying to find areas where I really want to push the color. So like right in, maybe right above his eye is not quite in the light, but it's kind of starting to get some of this cool feeling that's a little lit above the eye. And so I'll just add, you know, crazy colors like this, which you wouldn't think of as quote unquote flesh tones, but I'll build a whole entire head like this without thinking of anything realistic at all. Because again, I want to get those subtle layers underneath. I want to get that feeling that, you know, there's all this sophisticated color that's happening underneath the quote unquote flesh tones. Here's like a pumpkin orange kind of thing. So I would, you know, once I really start thinking about color, I would start literally laying color over top of these yellow areas, mindful of the value. In other words, in artist speak, I'm trying to match my colors to the value that's already there. If I go over here and do this, I've broken the value of the piece. So this is obviously too light here to match up to what's happening on his head. But over here, right near the break, this orange is like a lovely fit. If I go too far over in here, you're going to see it's like too dark, you know. And so color has an inherent lightness and a darkness to it. It has an inherent value to it. And so once I figure out all my values, how light and how dark things are on the head, then I can just, it's like almost just playing with color. It's like cooking with spices. You know, you're throwing in purples and reds and greens and you're figuring out those relationships before you really start thinking about the quote unquote real colors, which comes toward the end of painting. And so hopefully that gives you a little insight on how I think and how I work. I've tried painting like oil painters do, where they, you know, pick up a brush and they mix the exact hue, tone, color, texture, shape, and they stick it on and it's beautiful. Again, I blame my kids. They've killed all my brain cells and I just can't do that. I need the structure first, then nuancing of color, then creeping towards something perhaps realistic. And it's just a nice way to kind of, you know, set up different stages as I go along in the painting.
Christine, I know we're running short on time. We have quite a few questions still remaining. We'll try to get a couple in. Sure. So typically, is there a rough amount of time that you spend on a particular piece?
No, I don't set up time for painting, and I don't charge by size of things either. I typically charge by how many people are in the painting and how sophisticated it is. So whether it's, you know, a Head and Shoulders or whether it's something that was, you know, full body, little kids in dresses with bare feet out in the garden, obviously it's going to take a lot more time. So I don't really set up hours for things. I just kind of roughly set up, because sometimes, you know, I can do a head pretty fast like this. And it's wonderful and great. Sometimes it takes me a lot longer, and that's, I feel like, is on me, not on the client. So I charge by Head and Shoulders, 3/4 portrait or full painting. And so I don't really, but people always ask me, well, how long did it take you to do this painting? And I say, well, probably about a good almost 50 years. You know, I've been painting my whole life. When I was little, I used to follow the dog around and do drawings of it. And so I feel like I was always obsessed with people and their features. So yeah, it's taken me years to be able to figure this out.
And then are there any particular artists that you really follow yourself or that you particularly love?
There are a lot of illustrators that I have loved over the years since I started off as an illustrator. So the people that I appreciate and have loved the most over the years have been illustrators that have turned into painters. It's funny that the artists that I really love a lot and do amazing portraits started off in the illustration field because they were always thinking about design first. So there's artists like Burton Silverman, Edward Kinsler, who just passed away, Daniel Green, obviously. There's newer artists like Daniel Sprick. He's definitely worth looking up. There's another artist called David Casson. These are more realistic portrait painters. There's a lot of artists too that are, again, more illustrators and are looser that I also love. I've waxed and waned over the years. Like I love Andrew Wyeth, the watercolorist, the American watercolorist, because he was a designer. You know, like if you think about Wyeth and his watercolors, and you just think of him as an American watercolorist, you're kind of missing out on the beauty of Wyeth, because he was really a designer, and he was just a beautiful composer of images. And so I tend to lean toward artists that really have something to say with their pieces, or that are composing something very specifically in a graphic way, rather than just artists that are just painting things, you know. Did you have another question?
I think the one of the last questions that that was asked was, in terms of you incorporating different themes into your portraits, such as the Fibonacci series.
Yeah.
Is that something that you typically do, or is it something that just evolves depending upon the subject?
Yeah, I've kind of gone through waves over the years. So I really got into designing my images early on, and then I started becoming fascinated with, you know, master artists that would incorporate very sophisticated armatures and things into their paintings, Titian and Sargent and Vermeer. And so it just depends on, you know, what I'm studying kind of at the time. And now recently I've started playing with kind of incorporating the Fibonacci spiral into some of my more recent work. So, you know, you find something and it interests you, and then you have a body of work that maybe you're working on, and you think, well, how can I incorporate whatever this is that I'm studying that I really like into my current work? And that's kind of what happens. And then who knows, maybe 2 years from now, I won't be doing that at all. I'll be doing something else and maybe making them more graphic. I think it's a journey. Every artist has a journey. And so I don't think we're linear at all. I think you get on this path and it takes you over here and it takes you over there, and other, you know, things come up that kind of changes your work or get you thinking differently. But I don't know of any artist really that just does the same thing over and over again for a very long period of time. There's always change or something going on along the way, which makes it exciting and makes it fun. So
That's wonderful.
yeah, I wanted to pull this off the table here too and show you what this looks like kind of straight on, so you can kind of see it a little bit more. So again, when you're looking at it straight on, you can kind of see that, you know, again, it's building the depth of the piece and kind of getting those beautiful lines that you can tell with a flat two-dimensional surface, you know, and it all kind of starts for me with really understanding light, and then I get to play with color and all that other fun stuff. So did you have any other questions on any of that?
I think.
Oh, before you go, wait, before you have a question. Yeah, go ahead. Ask me the question, then I want to show you one more thing.
No, I think that's about it for now. Yeah.
I did want to show you, I have another painting over here of this model that I did a couple of years ago. He's been sitting here in my studio. So if you keep working on the piece long enough and you get into colors and you start understanding, then you wind up with something a little bit more like this, that's a little bit more sophisticated. So, and then, you know, once you understand the light and the color, then you can start playing with the textures of the things on his head, or whatever it is you want to say, the reflected light underneath the neck, things like that. And but again, all of this more sophisticated stuff starts with this, you know, basic structure underneath of just what's happening on that sophisticated surface. What is it that I want to say about this painting? And you know, for me, pastel's been a really nice way to do that. Like I said, I'm starting to do more with oils now, but I just love the drawing element of this and almost being able to like carve out the heads in space. And so it's been a passion of mine, obviously, for a very long time, and will continue to do so. And if anyone's interested more in my work, my website is swannportraits.com, Swann with 2 N's. So that's swannportraits.com. And every Wednesday I write a blog on art, motherhood, craziness, whatever comes up in my life. So if you go onto the website, you'll see my blog, and every Wednesday you'll get whatever I'm writing about that week. Some of it's pastel related, some of it's just art related, some of it's just life in general, and you can get that right into your inbox every Wednesday. And I am also doing more Zoom classes for the rest of this year. So again, that's all on the website too, and you're welcome to check all that out. So
that's great. Well, I think Doug's going to wrap us up. This has just been wonderful.
Oh,
really
happy
wonderful.
To do this. Been very, very happy to do this. Appreciate it. Christine, do you want to spotlight? You want to spotlight something? Oh, you want me to go back? Let me remove my spotlight. You're back on.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what to say, Christine, other than like, wow, that was a very transformative hour to see how you bring these visions into reality and capture people so emotionally in the process. Thanks very much for giving us a glimpse into that world. Your work is truly fantastic, and we really appreciate you've made all of us richer for spending the past hour with us.
Thank you. I
So,
appreciate it.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much. I really appreciate being here today. Thank you so much. And thanks to
And
my
if there's
sister
any
for
other
setting this up.
questions at this moment, we could take one or two more.
Yeah, I'll be here for a little bit longer if anybody wants.
Otherwise, I'd like to say thank you, Christine,
Sure.
for sharing some of your time with us today and your work. As Christine mentioned, you can find her work on her website at swannportraits.com. There are also links to all of the other blogs that she does right from that website. We really hope you enjoyed today, and we hope that you can all join us next month for our second Inspire speaker series. MCF will be introducing Steve Cicero, who is a history professor and teacher here in the Pittsburgh area. Steve's talk is going to be on what's in a name, where he touches on some important streets and other Pittsburgh landmarks and talks about the history behind how they got those names. Some of that's pretty fascinating, and I think you'll all appreciate Steve's wit. So we would love for you to join us next month, and Melissa will be sending out invites shortly. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And again, I'll be here for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions or anything. So I'll be here for a little bit longer.
So you can take me off spotlight.
Oh, you got it. I love having this control. It's so fun.
Christine, could you share some of your final works just one more time again
Sure.
before we close our meeting?
Sure, sure. Let me get back to the screen share here. I'm gonna hang on one second. I need to find my file. Hey, Sue. I see Sue waving at me. So these are the ones that I showed earlier. I can just kind of flip through some of these again. Oops. Again, this one is of my daughter. This one's called Strands. This one's of my son. I've actually tortured them a lot over the years. They've become very game for just about anything, which has been really, really nice. This one's called Determined. And so he's very determined to draw and paint when he was beside me all the time on the easel. He's 15 now, not drawing and painting as much. He's on the computer more now. So, but it was a wonderful window of time when he was painting with me all the time. This is a model that I work with a lot. This is called Dignity. This was a friend of mine who was a watercolorist here in Pittsburgh. And so she spelled her name Louise, but without an O in it. So this is called No O in Louise, Please. And she was a very determined, very, very wonderful personality. This was just a headshot commission that I had done for the people in Singapore. And if you look kind of closely at this image, if I go in and look at it, you can kind of see the yellow stage underneath of it a little bit. This photo is not the best, but if you look really closely, you can see kind of how I'm understanding again the structure of the head, how the light is hitting here versus how it's falling off. And it's more obvious when you see the actual paintings, but you do see this yellow stage underneath pretty much everything. Here too, there was a lot of sophisticated stuff that was happening in all these shadows on the side of her face. So I needed to understand, you know, the edges, how sharp things were, how it broke and fell into the shadow and then picked back up again. And so again, it's all about the yellow stage for me, really understanding really sophisticated stuff that's happening like that. Yellow stage 2 underneath, even in the oil paints, more muted out through here, real deliberate underneath the oil paint in here. And then I just layer and layer and layer over top. And getting into some more of these more formal commission kind of things and my design work for them. And then this is just the scratching in of the initial pastel when I was kind of blocking in her head. And this is a formal portrait. of a little boy with a little coat on the couch. It was really sweet. And again, just showing the underlay of what was underneath that painting. So happy to share all those.
All right, thank you, Christine. That's really great.
Sure.
That's
That was
really
very-
beautiful.
Very
Sure.
special. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me to do this. This is fun.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, I want to join in for next month. That sounds fascinating. There's some amazing artists and speakers here in Pittsburgh. We're very, very fortunate. You know, amazing sculptors and glass blowers, and you know, yeah, we're very fortunate to have this much culture around. It's really amazing.
Absolutely. Well, we really look forward to everybody joining us next month. And again, Christine, thank you. Have a great afternoon. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first Inspire Speaker Series.
Thank you, everybody. Stay inspired.